Welcome to Culmination, where we're not experts, but we sure have a lot to say. In the process of becoming our best self, I have with me the aspiring lawyer, Marty Kahn, to discuss free will. And with that said, let's get started. So, Marty, here's the big question. What is free will?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on.
Of course, thanks for coming.
Yeah, so when you asked me about this topic, I was like, ooh, this is kind of a doozy. Just because I feel like it's such a broad topic. So I picked out like a dictionary definition, which is like the capacity for different agents to choose between different possible courses of action unimpeded.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. For me, I think
Ooh.
that free will is being able to choose the best possible course of action despite and while being influenced by outside and usually uncontrollable factors. Which,
And I
yeah,
think that would probably be more applicable to today's society.
yeah,
Wow. Or really just in general, like when you think about the human experience, because that definition just sounds like if free will was absolute and there were no factors.
yeah, and a lot of time when you have free will over certain decisions, you're already limited by it might be location, it might be cost. So like, right now during the summer, like if I had free will, I'd want to just be in the Bahamas the entire time. But I have other, you know, obligations such as this podcast and, other things that I have to do, so I can't really just fly over to the Bahamas, and nor do I really have the financial standing to just pack up and just, book a one-way ticket there.
Yeah.
Um, so that's sort of my thought on it. And not only that, but even if there's so many factors that go into your different decisions. My way of thinking about it is it might actually be somewhat religious when I think about free will.
Mm.
I think I've told you this before, but I grew up Jewish. But over the past summer, especially like during quarantine, I started to, I guess, explore different religions and whatnot.
Hmm.
And for me, I started looking into Hinduism actually. And they have this concept called karma, which
Yeah.
it's not exactly like if you do good things will happen to you, but it's more like cause and effect, that sort of thought process.
Okay.
Or,
So do you
yeah,
want to elaborate?
yeah. So if you think about like your free will, it's about like what actions you take, right?
Yeah.
Karma is about sort of the actions that you take are influenced by past results that happened. So if let's just say you are thinking, should I study extra for this test? Well, the previous results might have been like how well did you do on the practice test, and like how well did you do on the previous test before will influence the action that you take right now.
Hmm.
And then actions in the future or results in the future are based off of the actions that you take in the present, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Well,
Or
because that's how it worked in the past, but now
yes.
now it's the present.
Yeah, if that's a little bit weird, it's also like Newton's third law, like with every reaction there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's just cause and effect.
Yeah, because it's like in the past, if you study for a test, then in the present, you already have like a predisposition of, okay, I have some knowledge because I studied for it, so my odds of doing better on this test are greater odds. And if I do well on this test, or if I do poorly on this test, my future choices will be, or like the results will act in accordance.
Yes. And so with this about karma, about actions and results, I think that when we link it back to free will, I think all you can really control is whatever actions you have. And so the
Mhm.
far majority of things are out of your control. And so I think that free will that we have is very, very limited if you want to consider we have any at all. So, yeah, so one example is like, let's just say, like, especially as we're about to go into college, you can say, like, oh, we have free will in choosing which college we attend, right?
Yeah.
But but is that really true? Like, what college you attend is depending on what college accepts you. And that's not something that you can control.
When it's also like talking about the karma, how you mentioned, it's like if you got the good grades in the past, then your transcript is better, and a better transcript means more choices.
Right, but even about getting grades, like a lot of that about getting good grades is also partially out of your control. Like I'm sure you understand, at least for me personally, when you're taking like different AP classes or whatnot, there are some kids that excel at certain subjects naturally
Yeah.
and may be more academically gifted, and that's not something that they control. Some of that might be genetics, and some of it might be luck on if they transferred in from a different school and they might have had a learning style that was more conducive for them there, and so then when they transferred to Sycamore, it might have been more difficult to switch over.
True. I
And
mean, what
so,
I was thinking, I thought you were gonna go the route of like a teacher who grades harsher because
yes.
I personally have a teacher who kind of tainted my transcript.
Yeah, is it the teacher that we both had with in Chinese with Zhang Lasher? And
No.
okay.
No, that was fine. Like that felt more fair, you know? I feel like
Yeah.
most classes were fair, but this one that I'm referring to that I'm not gonna mention is just
Okay.
yeah, like no, it kind of tainted my transcript.
Right.
Chinese went well because I took the time to learn everything and whatnot.
Yeah, but even like when we talk about stuff like that, like the majority of things, such as like your grades and whatnot, like when you're applying to colleges, it's not like there's like things that you did in the past, but when you're currently making that decision, it's not like you did that yourself, if that makes sense.
Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah. So, for example, like when you're applying to college, it's based off of like everything that you did in the past, but the person who's currently making that decision, who currently has the free will to pick whichever university, they didn't themselves did it. It was just like a past version of you, if that makes sense.
Uh, it's still a little complicated, but I guess like kind of going off of what you're saying, it's like, well, then you could go into the person who accepts people at the college, like I don't know, like the advisors or something.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
college
administration.
admissions.
Yeah, like they could maybe they're tired and don't read an essay thoroughly enough, so they deem it as unworthy, so then you don't get accepted. Or I don't know. I mean, there's other things that you could get into of like things out of your control. But also, I mean, there's the fact that people like a lot of people choose to go in-state for financial reasons. And if we had, so that limits your choices already. I
Yeah,
mean, you still have the free will to choose like those schools, like out of those. And I'm thankful at least that the ones we've had in Ohio are pretty good for the most
yeah,
part. Like, there's some solid choices there, and actual choices. But then again, it's like it's all dependent on how hard you worked in school and all these other factors as well. But if we had complete free will, then theoretically we would be able to attend any college anywhere. So that could be Stanford or really any university all across America or internationally too. Like I could just go to South Korea if I wanted
right,
to.
right,
Um,
absolutely.
so I guess this leads us to the obvious question: Does do we even have free will?
Yeah, so a lot of times when you go into making a decision like free will, I think you just like, okay, I'm making this decision right now, and so like the time that my free will starts is like current. So I'll give
Hmm.
an example because I think that's kind of weird to explain, but let's
Hmm.
just say you're about to work on a paper and you can choose, okay, well, I can either procrastinate and like not like I can either like work on it right now and try to get it all done, or I might like, play games a little bit and, do whatever and go hang out and then
Yeah.
do it. And like those are my two choices. And then I think a lot of times once you make that certain decision, like especially if it's the latter of the two, you start to feel bad or you start to put yourself down on it because you're like, okay, I had free will and I decided to do, X decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think I would say that most of the time we don't have free will because there was a lot of factors leading up to whether or not you want to, do this paper or take some sort of test. And there's a lot of factors such as like, let's just say that, you know, there might have been an illness in your family or you had like other I guess, previous commitments that took up a lot of time that
Yeah.
influence your decision, even subconsciously. And so it's always based off of something else. And then you can keep on tracing back, like, okay, well, I didn't do this because, let's just say, I didn't study enough. And I didn't study enough because, let's just say, something else out of your control happened. And there are a lot of like factors with it that go into whatever decision you're making with your free will. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that we do have free will. I think that at best, all your free will is just trying to do something that gives like your future self the best at like advantages for it to succeed.
So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I don't want to leave it at that. Like I don't want this episode in a sense to be like an argument against free will where free will like doesn't exist, we don't have it, and kind of leave it at that. Just
Yeah.
because the way that this show is designed is I realized after I made multiple episodes is that it was kind of clear to me what the main theme is becoming your best self. Like that's the slogan.
Yes.
And it's true. Like I aim it for self-improvement and mental health and all that. But I realize that the underlying theme that's more subtle is finding the control in your life. The control that you do have and essentially harnessing the internal locus of control, which is kind of the basis of the first episode that I've done.
Yeah.
And if free will doesn't exist, I don't want people to listen and feel discouraged because it's like, in a sense, there's a lot of external factors in our life, but we can't let them overtake us. Like, yes, there's inevitable things. And frankly, I would be dense. Like, I would literally be an idiot
Yeah.
to like try to convince you that like there's not that stuff, you know? Like I can't just be blind or lie or ignore obvious facts that
Yeah.
there's external factors in our life.
I
But I would
I was
argue that we need that control.
Yeah, I think that maybe I was maybe phrasing it poorly, but I think acknowledging that your free will is limited is actually very freeing. And I think it's
Hmm.
actually much more positive than I think maybe I was describing it with you.
I
So,
wasn't that wasn't a commentary on anything you said that I thought was poorly. It was just like the natural direction of the episode.
yes.
It's just like this is good. I think this is really good setup, but I feel like this is the transition of how we can find that control. But that's
Yeah.
an interesting point that you say. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, when I say that the majority of things are out of your control, all that you can really I think about free will a lot like if I don't know if you play video games or whatnot, or what type of games you play, but
Mhm.
I think if you think about it as a video game, you're like when you go into like a certain situation in a game, you might have different like buffs and debuffs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so your free will is like you can make what decision you want to make, but you can't really control what buffs you have going into the decision, right?
Yeah.
But when you're at that time, you can choose to add more buffs that might help you later on down the line. And
Yeah.
so knowing that your free will is limited and that the person that you are tomorrow, like they're gonna have to make different decisions that you are today, and the person, a month from that and a year from that, a lot of times you can sort of set up, and I think you can sort of set up these certain buffs to try to help yourselves. And so just like when we were talking about like, okay, like let's just say I have to choose whether or not I want to take a test.
Yeah.
And so debuffs might be like, oh, I didn't go to class. Well, why didn't you go to classes? Because, maybe, like I said, maybe there was illness in your family, or maybe your friend got sick and you had to, like, take care of them and you weren't feeling up to par.
Yeah.
Those are things out of your control. But knowing that that's happened in the past, with your free will, you might want to join a study group now that meets, once a week. That way you have a guaranteed time to study. And so
Yeah.
even though you can't do it based off results, you just think that this action will help you in the future. And so you're
Yeah.
adding buffs in the future.
Right. And
And
it's all about how you respond to a situation.
right. And so I think a good part about having the free will is a lot of time, let's just say that there you have some sort of failure, such as like let's just say with the college admissions, the college that you wanted didn't like accept you.
Hmm.
Well, a lot of times people just like, oh, they just take all the blame. But if there's that many factors, you can't take all of the blame, if that makes sense. And so a lot of times people are afraid of failing because they think, well, I mean, if I fail, then like if I don't succeed, then I'm a failure. But
Hmm.
with free will being mostly, limited at best, that your failures aren't just all on you. There's a lot of other factors, and by knowing that, you can best prepare to try to give yourself a better opportunity. You can't control the results,
Yeah.
I'd say it's similar to like let's just say you want to start like it's like growing a tree, or let's just say you want to grow a garden.
Yeah.
Like as I know that if I want to grow a garden, I need to have seeds, I need to have soil, and I need to water it. But like I can't control if the seeds sprout or not.
Yeah. Or
All
if
I
it
can
like
do is
suddenly
just
dies.
yes, all I can do is just keep on planting seeds and hope that it grows and keep on watering and hope that it works.
Hmm.
And so that's my free will is choosing to plant that seed and choosing to water and choosing to, add nutrients to the soil. Free will isn't like having a garden and forcing the garden to grow. And so by having free will, I think you focus more on the actions of planting and of watering and of growing. And that way, if things don't work, like the whatever one seed or two seeds don't work, like you won't feel as bad because you did all you could.
Yeah, and you can adapt to it. And it's like as you notice, let's say you plant three different seeds, but do the same exact procedure, like the same amount of water, the same like gardening techniques, you tilled the soil the same, you use the same soil, like all of that. It's like, well, if this seed, let's say there are three different seeds, but it's like the same like green beans plant or something.
Yeah.
It's like that way you're trying to alleviate all of the confounding variables. Um, then you can notice which seeds work better than the others. So after that experimentation, you don't have the free will to theoretically have everything go perfect. Uh, Now that I think about it, it's almost like perfection
Right.
if I think about that. Um,
Now,
but look at the seeds that worked and placate off that.
yes. Now, this is a thing with this free will thing is if let's just say like I think that if the plant wouldn't grow, you wouldn't say that's your fault, right?
Hmm.
Well, if that happens, if there's successes too, you also can't claim 100% of the success. Now
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's the tricky thing is people want it's not free will is an excuse to alleviate failure and then claim success. It's like, look, there's a lot of opportunities that we were able to get that like advantages that we got that were not up to us, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So
Well,
like
it's just like most of the future is just probability.
yeah. But what I was sort of hinting at was like, let's just say like we were talking about these disadvantages when you make certain decisions. Well,
Hmm.
there are also advantages that every single person has as well. And with that, that's things that even though with your free will, like that's something that if you acknowledge that you have it, you can sort of utilize it. And like you was talking about take control, like that's something that could help you in your next decision making and with your certain results. So, for example, like personally, during like senior awards nights, they were giving out different like language medallions and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it was like different subjects medallions. Well, I won the Chinese medallion, and going into it, I had a lot of advantages because I grew up, half Chinese with a mother who spoke Chinese and grew up in China all her life. So when I was raised in the US, I was surrounded by Chinese culture all the time. So it made it a lot easier to, do well in Chinese class and lead Chinese club and whatnot. Like those are all things that I wouldn't say that I did earn through free will, but there was a lot of advantages that I have to acknowledge as well.
Hmm. Right, and it's almost like a humble kind of feeling too, where some of the stuff that you can't control.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's like it's not exactly that things are out of your control. And I think that a lot of or the important thing to keep in mind is what you focus on specifically And we kind of touched upon this with the gardening metaphor, where it's like you're not focusing on the free will of whether the plant grows or dies or has like a plentiful harvest that is
Right.
like, whoa, okay. um, but it's more of the focus on your individual actions and your control. Because everything you do, like the actions, even though there's a hint of randomness, it's still all about what you do. Like if your inputs are slightly wrong or something, then that might affect the the results. But you have to keep regulating that and you'll figure it out with experimentation. But again, I guess the main point is it's what you focus on. And I feel like what a lot of people need to focus on, at least because it helps me, that's where it's coming from, is
Yeah.
just gaining control in your life. Because even though, I don't know, like free will, if it was true free will and we could do anything, like basically sandbox mode,
Yeah.
creative mode for those Minecraft fans out there, like it would be really cool at first, and then you would just get bored because you're basically a god and nothing's stopping you, no limitations, no challenge, no hardships, like no appreciation for anything. Um, and also like a lot of people like just don't know what to do with themselves. Like when you're completely free, it's like I can do anything, but that's scary because it's like what's going on? Like I remember I was talking with somebody and they mentioned how when they were growing up, their parents said like this was like a classic thing that the Gen X generation did. It was like, like you're very special, you're a special child, you can do whatever you want in life. And it's
Yeah.
like the sentiment is good. I think we can all get behind that. Like they wanted what's best for their child, and you can't really refute that. Like the intention was not malice. But the unintended consequence was when you kind of placed upon this unrealistic free will on your child, and it also ignores the fact that you can't actually be anything you want. Like I couldn't win the Chinese medallion unless I absolutely studied my ass off, I guess. Well, okay.
Yeah.
I could if I did that, but like you did have that huge advantage.
Of course, and that's something that you have to acknowledge with it. But I think what's interesting about free will is even though I had that advantage growing up, that doesn't mean that you can't create new advantages. That's what I think is
Mhm.
special about free will is all we really have like action-wise, all we can do is just what we have is the present, right?
Yeah.
And so different things that you can do is like doing things that might give you future self advantages.
Yeah, like I theoretically could I'm actually kind of disappointed that I said that because I could have won that Chinese medallion. I don't wa-
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't want the message to be like I just couldn't because there's always going to be somebody way better than you and way worse than you. I mean ultimately you need to be the best you because you can only be you, and when you try to be someone else that just fails. But like I could have won that medallion. I
Yeah.
but I actively didn't value that like pursuing that route as much as you did. So there you go.
And
Like it's
and
nobody's fault.
yeah, and one thing about that is when we talk about free will, like I think that doing Chinese and doing that in order to win said medallion or working at this in order to win that, I kind of think that's sort of an issue. Like not issue, but I think that's sort of flawed thinking. I think doing it just for this one certain goal sort of predicates all your actions based on this result. And then it's
Mhm.
like, okay, well, I either fail or I don't.
Yeah.
Versus if you'd like, okay, I want to learn Chinese because I think it'll help or because it's something I think it'll benefit me somehow in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know how it will. Like for example, like when I was taking, I didn't even know that class medallions, what like subject medallions existed.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Like you
but I
weren't
just
doing it for the medal.
yes, but but I had a feeling that if I kept on doing Chinese, I might know more about my heritage. I might learn, I might sharpen up my skills with the language. I don't know
Mhm.
exactly what it'll lead to, but you just do it because because it's a buff that I'll have, going out into the future.
It's a
Same
buff.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing that if like when you treat like working out. So like let's just say I run like I lift every morning. Um I don't do it because I need to get huge muscles, but because I know that in the future I just feel like there's some benefit to it. And when you have this sort of mindset of like working, sort of like trust the process, some may say, or like fall in love with the process, when you do it with free will about trying to stack advantages, I think that way you're able to do something without having to try to get a certain result. And instead, because you have no idea what the result may be, it might come in the
Yeah.
next month and it might come in the next like decade. But if you just keep on trying to have it like stack advantage and stack buffs, when you do have another, fork in the road when your free will needs to make a decision, the decision that you make is going to be, it'll be easier for your future self.
Yeah, and kind of touching upon what I was saying earlier, there's almost like an idea you could think of, and I'm making this up, but like a guided free will. Because, I mean, first of all, we've already ruled out the fact that true free will can't exist in this society anymore.
It even
Um,
it even is limited before you're born because genetics play a large part of it.
right, that's true. Like,
And like let's just say you're born in a third world country versus if you're born upper middle class in a first world, like if we keep on going by video games, like your spawn points are way different. And so if you have different, and so if I'm, born like in a good spawn point with great loot, like the amount of options that I have is
oh
a lot
god,
different
dude.
than yours. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot that is up to luck, and so then once you're at that spawn point, then what are you gonna do? And it's like, okay, I have no armor, no weapons, no nothing. Well, my free will is like, let's try to get some buffs, let's try to get some gear, so that in the future I'll be able to do something. Versus the person who already has that will make different decisions.
Right, and like predisposition matters because you can't ignore it. But I don't know, at the same time, you always need to be looking forward. Like you can't waste time like attacking yourself or hating yourself or even like victimizing yourself because it's like when you do that, you're just keeping yourself down and there's no way to go up, you know?
Yeah,
So and with that said, like disclaimer, like I understand why that happened. So that's not saying that it shouldn't happen because like it obviously happens and it happens for a reason. But, you know, on this show, we're trying to provide insight and be insightful. And like anybody can build themselves up to be anything. They just
yeah.
have to want it. And that's kind of where I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well, I think what I was just saying is like acknowledging what you have going forward and sort of acknowledging like, hey, this is who I am and these are the factors that influence whatever decision I'm going to be making. Like
Hmm.
not only positive but also the negative. I think that's important because then your decisions now will also, affect and either be an advantage or a disadvantage to future you, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And so even though like let's just say you weren't born Chinese and you still want to learn it, like acknowledging like, hey, there are kids in this class that were pretty much who grew up with this language their entire life, might even
Yeah.
speak it, first, like
I mean, that was
acknowledging
me.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So saying like, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. So I think I want to stay after school and work a little bit extra versus, they don't really have to try as much because they kind of know what these concepts are. And there are different concepts that might even be ingrained into the language that's harder for you to understand just because that's not something that's very easily like translatable from English to
Right.
Chinese, like sort of acknowledging that and then taking steps to prepare and buff yourself in those sort of scenarios in the future, I think is very, I don't know,
Yeah. And adding to that,
enlightening or hopeful.
yeah, adding to that, it's like, it's also about your intention and your in quotes why. Like why are you doing that? I mean, for me, I literally joined Chinese class like in 7th grade when foreign languages were like now a thing.
Yeah.
I originally joined it for the simple reason of that's what my brother did. So it's like, okay, I'll just follow that. It was my choice, but like I just made it simpler and just did what he did. Same for why I did percussion in fifth grade. Um, but as I pursued the language, I really did grow an appreciation for it. And even though I acknowledged the fact that there were people better than me, like people who grew up with it, could speak it fluently and everything, I never really cared because that wasn't the point. That wasn't why I was there. I didn't want to be better than people. I didn't care about that. It was just like, this is a neat language and I'm just gonna get the most that I can from it. I mean, I
Yeah,
had my reasons for not going all the way with AP and that getting into that,
absolutely.
yeah, getting into that would like nothing bad. It was just like personal. Like they added a level 5 and everything, and with my schedule, it just wasn't really the right choice. So there was no like resentment or anything towards that. I'm actually pursuing Chinese in college next year, so
Oh, nice.
um, yeah, that'll be interesting. Like, see, I'm not even like opposed to that because I just remember when I would learn that language, and I was never good at speaking it. I'm
I you honestly weren't bad.
well, yeah, but we never really practiced it,
That's
so
fair.
it was hard, and I didn't want to. It's one of those things where we didn't practice it, so I was bad, and I didn't want to practice it because I was bad, so it was like this negative feedback loop. But I don't know, like I could read it and I could write it, and it was I don't know. It's an interesting uh language there.
Yeah, absolutely. I
我喜
also
欢中文.
Kaihala. But yeah, I was gonna say, oh, that also he said basically, in case you don't speak Chinese, is that he likes Chinese, and I
Yeah,
was like, that's great. But
yeah.
AP Chinese was literally just all kids that spoke it at home. It was literally just
Yeah.
so so you might have been a little bit out of place since you didn't speak it fluently going in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But yeah, so when we were talking about free will, I think I mentioned you with this like before we started recording, but I wasn't sure like what direction you wanted to go, whether or not it was like the free will about, like do we even have free will, or if you were talking about more like how our brain works with technology and whatnot, which I think might be something interesting to delve into.
Well, we talked about the former quite a bit, so we have some time. Would you like to get into the technology component?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit interesting just because I think the fact that everyone's like I don't want to say like hating on social media, but putting, sort of. I think now people are more acknowledging some of the dangers with it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think one of the biggest things is like sort of stealing away your time and free will, if that makes sense.
Hmm. So I guess we can get into it. And you've
Yeah,
done like your research on this, right?
I did a little bit, not a ton. I read some books about it, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it is just like I think just personally speaking, which was just like experimenting with myself at least.
Yeah.
Um, So there's so I don't know if I mentioned this before, but like in terms of like mental health, I definitely struggled with like depression and definitely like wasn't great, especially during this quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I was gonna lead back was I felt a lot of it was because I was just wasting so much time and wasting my day just because I felt like I there were things that I wanted to do personally and just I there'd always be something that came up and I'd never just get it done.
Yeah.
So and so some of it might be like, oh, I wanted to um, like wake up in the morning and do yoga, or I wanted to like work on college essays early, and then I'd end up like getting on a Discord call and just like playing, team fight tactics or like League of Legends for like 8 hours that day.
Yeah.
And so even though I chose to do it, subconsciously I knew there was something else I wanted to do, and yet it seems like that my brain did it automatically, if that makes sense.
I don't know if that is free will because it's almost like it's more habitual and more
Yes.
of just like it's actually a lack of control. Because if you had self-control, you would be able to put down the, like the instant gratification, the pleasure of playing games at that moment right now. And you
Yeah.
would be able to do what you would want to do that's more productive and harder to convince yourself to do at that given moment.
Yeah. What like with it I'm sure like I think it's similar to like like there's some times where like you might pull out your phone and like you'll type in your password without even thinking about it, and then you pull up the same like set of apps and just start scrolling, all without even like realizing what just happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I think a big thing that's dangerous is what I think with technology is just I guess maybe changing or morphing your habits, but something that you weren't like cognizant of, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Was that's what I was thinking about with free will was like, do you think that like technology is sort of sapping us of our free will?
It's definitely an interesting question because in a sense kind of yes and no. I mean, if you think about it, think about YouTube. And I mean, obviously you can say a lot about YouTube. uh, like what yeah, all that, but at the beginning at least, and it still is like this. I mean, hell, I'm here. It's because of technology improving. Now we have a site where anybody can make content. Anybody anywhere. So that broadens free will because people have done that. Like you see people are finding success and having a following just playing video games or cooking or doing makeup tutorials or doing whatever it is that Jake Paul does or whatever.
Yeah,
uh,
fight like kids inside of a boxing ring.
yeah, like people, and there's some really dang creative like YouTube videos, even when it's like stupid, you know,
Yeah.
like random song parody covers, and it's like, yeah, this is dumb, but like, look how much time and love was truly put into this project.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking about free will earlier, we were saying there's like certain aspects that confine what opportunities you have. I
Hmm.
think that like YouTube and technology is one thing that like sort of frees it up.
Yeah, and like technology, like also consider that video of like a parody video. Technology got so good that we can edit a video like this. We have better quality cameras. Hell, I can record like a great quality vlog with my phone or film a movie with my phone. A movie, a short film. And it looks good on my phone. The thing that was
Yeah,
supposed to just call people. Like remember those bricks back in the 80s?
right.
Yeah. Like this is amazing. And there's like in a sense, there's truly something to be grateful for with the luxury that we have, especially when it comes to technology. Like these video games that we have are so immersive, they're so fun, they're so like they look so realistic and
Right.
they feel good to play and I don't know, some other things teach you. Hell, we were able to have an entire school year
Online.
online.
Yeah.
Now, again,
At
all of
what
these
point?
things that I mentioned have caveats. Like,
Yes.
there's been articles and research about like what I just mentioned, like the school year. Like, it's definitely not an ideal thing, especially with children who have low attention spans. Like, you're telling me that I'm in third grade and I'm trying to learn my multiplication table off Zoom? No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
know what I mean? There's something grand about it as well. But, you know, that was
Yeah.
my spiel about the good of technology. And now we could talk about the bad.
Yeah. My only thought was that like I think there is a lot of good. I just think that like at what point is it endangering? And even though you have so many opportunities, at what point is there just so much abundance that like you aren't really exercising your free will, if
Exactly.
that makes sense?
Do you want to get more into that?
Yeah, I guess we can go with that. It's just like, so a lot of times when you go and use your computer and use your phone, so I think I told you this before, but I recently, I guess, relatively recently read a novel, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. It's called The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. And so a lot of times this book has a lot of like scientific research and studies done on, how technology is affecting the way that our minds are thinking. And in
Hmm.
the book, it talks they list certain studies in which like people who, let's just say, use technology are more likely to crave that sort of fast, are more likely to be, I guess, like, it's a lot easier to like crave that, instant gratification, very quick like hit of dopamine from using technology, and
Yeah.
that people can't really focus for as long. Like when you were talking about like, kids in third grade learning multiplication tables, I thought that you're actually going to go over the fact that like stuff like ADHD and whatnot has been skyrocketing over the past decade.
Mm-hmm.
And this the thing is ADHD it's an official like mental disorder, like ADD, attention deficit disorder, is real. But
Yeah.
like, well, how come all of a sudden there's like an 80% skyrocket? Is it just random that 80% of the kids just randomly started developing this new, you know developing it, or is it
Doesn't
that
sound likely.
right, or is it that technology is affecting it?
So do you want to get into how it does exactly?
My thing was just like on your opinion on like is it something that should be embraced with free will, or is it something that you know like how should we find a balance with it? I guess if because you said that this is about sort of like self help, and I think I think I've personally ventured on both ways where I've like been, I don't want to say like addicted to the internet, but like certainly like screen time wise is hitting at least double digits every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone on like, gone weeks at a time not using my phone at all, like locking it inside of a cardboard box and, you know,
I still
not
find that funny
touching it.
though.
Yeah. Well, that's my thing was a lot of time when I was reading, it was like, it does like alter the way your brain works. And so when you have that sort of desire, like when I went off of my phone for, that first week, like the first 2 to 3 days, like I had like, as silly as it sounds, I had like withdrawal from my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd be in the bathroom and I'd just be like checking my pockets and it just wasn't there. And I
Your
just
thumbs
had,
would move on their own.
my hands would instantly go for my pocket and I'd just like sort of like air type in my passcode and it just wasn't there. And so I was just sort of just forced to just sit. And it was so agonizing because my brain's just used to always looking for the next, thing, distraction, distraction, distraction.
Yeah.
So finally being left to your thoughts is so foreign.
Hmm.
And I think that with it, like, I think a lot of times, like, your brain is just like, it builds like different, like it's like we're creatures of habit, I guess. And it's just like
Yeah.
a muscle. And it's like,
It's
if you,
conditioning.
yes, it's conditioning it. And so there's like neural pathways that are strengthened more and more. And so like when you don't focus for long periods of time, that's something that sort of withers away
Yeah.
with it.
Um, to kind of go back to your question of like, what was your question again?
Oh God.
I like know the basis, but would you mind like saying it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it myself. I didn't necessarily write it down, but I was just like, at what point do you think it goes from being something super positive where we have all these opportunities to where it starts to constrict, even though you have these all like with the internet, you have endless possibilities.
Yes.
But with it comes endless distractions.
Yeah.
At what point do you think there is like a happy medium, or is there a happy medium that just exists?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like I can kind of answer that. It's not going to be a nice, pleasant answer. It's kind of what you would expect, but it depends.
Yeah.
Like, you have to consider everything though. So I'll explain it with like multiple examples of different types of people. If you're an entrepreneur and you have had experience of like kickstarting things and you're just a very diligent, productive, efficient worker, then the internet could be a blessing to you because you're innovative and you want to work with it, you want to understand how things work. Maybe you have some knowledge of psychology, so it's like when you go into marketing or things, it's like you know how to placate towards what people like.
Yeah.
So the internet is a blessing for you. But what if you're like, well, and then there's other situations where it's like you're a kid in high school and the internet's really helpful because it can provide definitions or like Google Translate when you don't understand like something in Chinese or like understanding math.
Yeah.
Like there's tons of resources like Khan Academy that are just at your disposal, and it's really helpful. But also, this could be at your detriment because there's other things like photo math, which literally do the problems for you. So you don't actually take the time to learn the material. So you're actually kind of robbing yourself. Um, so technology, it's kind of like it has its perks, but it also has its downside, and it's entirely up to how you use it. But it's also, even that is confusing because it's like, yes, it depends on how you use it, but sometimes the internet has geared you to use it in certain ways, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you're conditioned to whip out your phone all the time. When you're on Instagram, you're tempted to look at all these things for a longer period of time. Um, just the fact that we use screens all the time, our attention spans are completely shredded. Every
Yes.
YouTube video, every Snapchat streak. Like the fact that I've seen people go over 200 daily streaks with somebody
Oh, it's
on
insane.
Snapchat. What even is this? Like,
Yeah, it's become like a daily ritual at that point.
yeah, because I've never used social media before besides Reddit, but you go on Reddit to go on Reddit.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's different, I feel. And I only go on it when there's literally nothing else to do and I'm not at home and I like if there's nothing to do. Um, but anyway, I remember like asking somebody who has like all these streaks with somebody. I'm like, "So what does a streak do?" And they're like, "Nothing." I'm like, "All right, so why do you care?" And it's like, "Well, I don't know, like I want to see the number go up." And it's like fair. I mean, I'll admit I like seeing numbers go up. I'm kind of fascinated with like collecting things or like
Yeah.
I don't know, it feels good to see a counter go up. Like whether it's your bank account or YouTube subscriptions.
Yeah.
But you know, um I don't know. What do you think about all this? Do you have your own examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing was, I think we've said before that I think that it's sort of like you can decide what you want to do, but a lot of times the actions that you take and the thoughts that you yourself think or know what's best won't coincide. Like, like they won't correlate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's I don't want to say technology is robbing us of our free will, but I think that's the best example is in maybe I don't know if I'd say in your heart, but you know what the best decision is, and yet
Yeah.
while you do it, there was because of technology, like oh okay, like Bing, let's do this, let's do that. Like there was so many distractions. Let's go check your phone. Let's go make a sandwich. Now let's go do this. Now let's do that. All of it is sort of robbing you from whatever your main goal is, whatever your true decision is. And
Right.
so if we loop it back to beginning, like it's like, okay, we have all these buffs and whatnot, and now we're at a crossroads on what decision to make. And even though you know what decision might be your best one, you still might choose to procrastinate, and you still might choose like the wrong decision, quote unquote, however you would define wrong as.
Yeah, and mind if I add this? It's like the word choose that you're using is already interesting because sometimes you're actively choosing and sometimes it's more habitual. Like when
Yes.
I sit down and I have an hour like block of time, it's like I'm sitting in my chair and it's like, I could read right now. My book is right next to me. But guess what is also next to me? My
Right.
phone. So, all right, well, I don't know. Maybe I could go for listening to something. So maybe I'll watch like a 10-minute YouTube video. So then 10 minutes goes by
And
and
you
I haven't
yeah,
even watched the video. I'm scrolling to find a video.
you're in the wormhole.
Yeah, and then it's like, all right, here's something. Then it's 20 minutes and it's like some video that doesn't have any merit to it. It's like, I don't know, top 10 total drama island characters or something.
Yeah,
Don't judge me, bro.
that's a
Um,
classic.
yeah, yeah. And then like just something completely like just random. And then, oh, I guess I'm out of time. I can't read my book that is very important to me and I would learn a lot from. Like every time I read, I appreciate it.
It's just hard to get into that mode.
It's the hardest thing about reading is sitting down to do it.
Yes.
And
I think
the fact that we can't read is, shouldn't that be concerning?
Yeah, I mean, there's even studies that what's interesting is they've actually had people like read different like pages, and there's like trackers to track where their eyes are looking. So it's like, are they reading every single word? And
Hmm.
people will like skim the first two sentences of it, read like, they won't ever cover the full paragraph. It's just them jumping around and skimming just paragraphs, and that's how people are reading normally,
Is that
which
how
is
it's always been?
No, usually, especially no, usually it's not. Usually, like if you read the full thing, you have to look at each word. But I think
Yeah.
with social media, there's just a lot more jumping around and sort of like, okay, I'll like understand most of the context of what is happening, but
Mm.
being able to do focused, deep reading is becoming more and more rare.
That's so interesting because it's like, think about what you're actually reading on Snapchat. It's like, or not Snapchat. I think Instagram's probably better for this. It's like you're reading these bios, especially when it's like you're looking for a roommate or something, and it's like, hey guys, I'm Ken. I play football and
Yeah,
hit me up.
yeah,
uh, it's like you're reading it to get the gist, but it's so interesting because in your brain, you're conditioning yourself to always read like that.
yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. And I think part of it is even the medium that you're reading on is like now more and
Yeah.
more people are reading on like iPads and iPhones and whatnot versus like an actual book. And
Hmm.
when you have ways to like highlight things and do quick word searches, that's even distracting up the way that you would read a book.
Yeah.
So it's becoming more and more prevalent. And I think it's fine a lot of the times, but it does make it so that when you do like there might be certain like job aspects or certain situations where you do need to focus for that four,
Yeah.
5, 6 hours, and you're just not able to do so.
Oh, also consider this. Um, you know how you just said like when you're on a Kindle or something, you can like highlight a word and it tells you the definition?
Yeah.
I mean, I read a lot of like sophisticated self-help stuff. Um,
Hmm.
so there's obviously a lot of words that are like very big. It's like, whoa, I don't know what that means. And it's like, yes, there are some occasions where I just don't know what it is and it would actually be beneficial to look it up. But think about also what you're robbing yourself of if you just look up every word. Context clues.
Yeah.
And what is context clues? It's in a sense an aspect of critical thinking. Like if you can understand a word, or even forget that, like understand the gist of what you just read with a word that you don't know. I mean, they teach you this when you learn a foreign language because you
Yeah.
obviously don't know these words. But if you understand the words around it, I mean, sometimes it's like unavoidable. Like if the sentence is "I am going to go to the library," it's like "wo yao chu," like I want to go to.
And
Like
you
if
have
I
no
don't know the
idea
word
what.
library yet,
Yeah.
like yeah. But this context clues, it's like we don't really think critically because we're not really placed in a situation where we need to.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, that's the thing is like there were a lot of like brief interactions that you may have like I just say that the interactions that you have like not with technology is just becoming shorter and shorter, and I think it's like a lot of it is sort of programming or training your brain to just get back more and more towards it, and I think that's something that I would say might be robbing us of our free will is just the fact that our thought our way that we like think and process ideas and information is even being altered. I think that's something that I don't want to say it's like dangerous in like a scary way, but it is something that you should kind of like acknowledge and take part and like, think about.
Yeah. So, and I guess we've been talking about this for a while now. So, what do we do? What is the Marty seal of approval? How to fix a generation?
I think I think there are a lot of, professors and whatnot that are much smarter than I am and researchers that know a lot more.
I would
I'll
disagree.
just but I'll just go with some what I did personally and like some background was like I think I've kind of hinted at it before, but like during the summer, especially during quarantine, like I felt terrible. Like I would just play video games all day and or like, go on or watch videos all day. And like it felt pretty like it felt good at the time, but like, you'd go 4 hours in and you're like, man, I just don't really like I don't feel great, but like I'd think that and I'd still play for another, 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
And I mean I felt like terrible. I felt like there was so much of my day that was just like it was just a blur that I was just wasting.
It's like you're just floating in space. And
Yeah, and then like even when I wasn't like I just felt empty when I wasn't because my brain was just my synapses was just craving some sort of like very fast like interactions here and there. And I got
instantaneous gratification.
yes, and I got lucky during quarantine where doing it like if you didn't respond or if you were busy if you were busy like and you went on like your phone for a day or two, like everything was sort of at a standstill. So there was no like school obligations, no work obligations. And so I took a full week and it was a full 10 days and just put my phone in a cardboard box and taped it up. And the
Mhm.
first, 2, 3 days were pretty bad, but afterwards, once my brain started to like adjust to not having, so many synapses firing all the time and like sort of slowing down, I was
Yeah.
able to like, I started doing yoga every day and whatnot, and I started like reading again. But obviously, that's not like realistic, especially when school starts. I think a
Yeah.
big thing is like trying to limit your screen time. I'd say.
A lot of the useless stuff, especially.
Yeah, so so on a phone, you can actually set a screen time. I would recommend something like that. Like I might say, like okay, limit it to 4 hours on all your social media platforms total, which is like that's still quite a bit, but still
It's
like,
a step.
but it's just a step, and finding different ways. Like there's things like YouTube, like suggestion blockers, or YouTube, like just like how you might download like an extension on Chrome that blocks like ads. You can
Mhm.
get some that blocks like suggestions or that blocks comments on YouTube. That way, it's like just one less distraction.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like when you are just scrolling your phone, it's because you're bored and you just don't know, like you just don't have anything to do. Like I'd say like find something that you're passionate about, or at least like find something that you think you might be passionate about, and like spend some time working on that.
It's that
And
free
that
will.
yeah, that's the free will is just like actively think trying to do things not because you need a certain result, but because it might, benefit you in the future.
Or because you have a love or passion for that.
Right. Now saying do something you're passionate about, I think it's tough because it's like a lot of times people don't know what it is, and just saying like do something you're passionate about just seems very like self-helpy.
Yeah, it's like how I said earlier where it's like you can do anything you want. It's like cool.
Yeah,
I don't know anything of what I want.
right. So it's just like but like my thought is like you won't be able to find what you want if you're just busy like getting distracted by your phone all the time. I think taking that time to really like think and reflect, and you know in some cases some people might journal. I think that's something that's very healthy, just
Mhm.
a way to sort of reflect. Not saying that you have to do it. I know some people, it definitely has helped some people.
Yeah, it
For
doesn't
me
work for
personally,
everyone.
yeah. But it's just like, deciding what it is, and just like how you said like, oh, like I remember I was watching your talk with Tilton, and you were talking about how everyone has different learning styles and trying to find like what you want to do. I think
Yeah.
that trying to reduce your distractions is like definitely a big part of that. It's just like, okay, let's actually spend time pursuing what I want.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's sort of my cup of tea is just sort of like limit how much you're using your phone, because if you think about, let's just say you have 8 hours of screen time, like how
Yeah.
many hours of it can you see something that you feel is not even noticeably positive, but that you feel is a positive advantage going into the next day?
Yeah.
And it's just trying to do things that you feel better about doing and that you think might help you in the future. You might not know exactly what it is. Maybe it's going to go like work out, maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it might be like, hey, instead of just being on my phone, why don't I go out with friends? And like, even though it's like, well, isn't that kind of a distraction, just like going out to hang? But I still think that's something that might help with your mental health in the
Yeah, it's like
future.
a social thing. And also your
Right.
friends can teach you a lot of things too.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
so
that is if they're good friends.
I mean, so I think it's just sort of trying to most things are out of your control. So when you have a decision to make, trying to actively make the most of it and keeping in mind that, hey, like there's a lot of things that I can't control. And if we go back to like the video game analogy, like, hey, there's like different balance patches that I can't control and whatnot. But like,
The game
all
devs.
right, the game devs might do whatever, but all I can do is like, okay, well, let's try to improve like my skill at the game itself.
Hmm.
That I guess that would be my advice.
All you can do is like respond to a situation. So
Right.
I
And
guess make it count.
yeah, and I'm just like some, 18-year-old about, college, not even college freshman, college hopeful, I guess.
So
So it's not like
basically, like listen to everything he says.
yeah, I was gonna, like this is just my thoughts on it and,
Stop being
just
humble, Marty.
but I was
You
like
know everything, bro.
but yeah, so just like my thoughts might change in the future, but as of right now, like that's sort of what I'm personally gonna try to do. And I'm certainly not perfect. Like my screen time recently hasn't been great, especially just right after school ended and after like AP exams, I kind of just needed like a 1 hour like unhealthy detox might
Uh huh.
be, or maybe I guess healthy, or like not even a detox since, or just toxifying might be a better way to say it.
Yeah.
But like give it like stuff like that, like even when you make mistakes, like just realize like, hey, there's a lot of factors going into my decision, like if I procrastinate and whatnot. So like don't be too hard on yourself to the point where you know you get super depressed about it, but just acknowledge like, hey, like this is definitely a mistake, this is something that I should try to correct for the future, and that's like a disadvantage that I had going into this decision. Like let's
Mm.
see if I can try to counterbalance it for the me of tomorrow or the me of 2 days from now and whatnot.
Yeah. And also, I want to throw this point in because I've actually discussed this point with other people. I have a really big pet peeve about something like weirdly specific, but it comes from like within. Like I struggled with this. It's when
Mhm.
it's almost like a trigger phrase at this point. Like I just get mad. Or
Yeah.
not mad, but just like irritated when I hear people say this because I know exactly what this does. It's when you say something along the lines of, I just need to do this, or I should do this. It's like one of those, like, a shot in the dark type sentences where it's like, you have no direction, or like you think you have direction where it's like, I just, I just need to work out, man. I just need to read. And it's
Yeah.
like, you set up, it's a trap phrase. It is. Because even though your phrase may be correct, it's a trap, dude. Don't say it.
Yeah.
Instead, say, tomorrow I am going to read.
Right.
Or, I am going to do this. I am going to take a walk. I'm
I
going to
also
take a walk right now. Like,
yeah.
like, because when you say stuff, like what you say actually does kind of matter in a sense. At least
Right.
sometimes. And
I
when
mean,
you
I
say these
think
words, huh? What?
I kind of agree with it. I feel like just is just sort of like a self-help phrase that like
Yeah.
different online gurus kind of just thought like dude, just like just go on a walk and don't be depressed. Like just exercise and you'll feel
Just
better.
stop
Just
being
do that.
sad. Yeah.
Right. Versus, I think that's why before when we were talking, I was like I tried to give out some like maybe some more concrete things you can do. Is like, okay, let's set limits to your phone time, or let's have
Hmm.
like a weekly like phone usage goal. So let's just say your screen time might be like 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Like let's cut it down to like 6, and
And
then
see
like
how that's different from you just need to cut your phone time down.
yes, because
Because what this does, and this is all personal, like I've been here. This is not my first rodeo, Barty.
yeah,
It's like when you say this, not only are you not going to do that thing automatically, like I just need to read tomorrow. You're not reading tomorrow, buddy. Like you're not. And when it gets to be tomorrow and you don't do what you just said,
you feel worse.
you feel worse because you created an expectation that you weren't even serious about.
So that's kind of what I was talking about, like with things being out of your control. Like you deciding not to read, is it partially your fault? Of course, but there's also things like, hey, you're basically like a soft core addict to like Instagram.
Yeah.
And that's a disadvantage going into trying to read. So like when you don't, like, you might be giving it your best effort and just acknowledge like, hey, this is something that is a problem, and like I am a softcore addict to my phone, and maybe something came up, so I thought I was gonna have 4 hours of free time and instead I only have like 2.5.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like I think that's where having that free will is like, it is limited. I think that's sort of freeing, as you won't really beat yourself down too much about something like that, and that you really are giving your best effort, but knowing like, hey, like I didn't get it today, like I have to, like, do you really want to try to do better the next day, and setting sort of like goals that aren't too strict either, because if you set something like, okay, I'm going to read 2 hours every day,
Yeah.
going from never reading to 2 hours a day is very difficult. But if you do something like, for me, like personally speaking, like one of my goals is to read 3 books this summer.
Yeah.
It's just like, if you think about that, that's like 1 book every month, so that's, might be like an hour, 2 hours of reading, like every other, like every week might be just like read 2 hours.
Yeah.
But having something that's like more like reasonable definitely will help with that, with what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, and also like you should be able to confront the problem. Like it isn't your fault that you can't read. Well, I mean it is, but like for the benefit of the doubt, it's like you are addicted to your phone.
Right.
And that wasn't like a conscious decision. It's not like you picked up your phone like it was a heroin needle and said, "All right, here we go."
Yes.
You but you need to confront the problem. It's like, I can't read because there's too many distractions here. You have to be logical about it. You can't just like be passive aggressive about it either. Like you have to sit down and think about like, okay, this is the actual problem. You just kind of need to first you need to accept what the problem is. Well, when I was saying that phrase, I was almost like, is me saying you need to do this, is that the same as I just need to do this? Oh no. Maybe
funny.
I'm just going down a loophole, but
Yeah.
at least confront your issues, get it out there so you know that it's a problem and you know what you're dealing with, and then act accordingly. Do you want to be distracted? Like, ask questions to yourself. Why am I doing this? Why do I want to do this? Why do I want to play golf and not stare at Instagram? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to consider priorities.
I was gonna say, like, acknowledging the fact that, hey, this isn't your fault, and like there are things that you can't control, does not mean that you can't try to fix them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, acknowledging that there are things that aren't your fault going into your situation, and acknowledging them and choosing not to correct them, I think, are two different things.
Mm-hmm. And also, the true willpower of mankind and just humans in general, like, it's not something to laugh at. Like, I feel like what would help us is we need to stop. I did the thing again. We're not weak. We're not weak. Gen Z is not weak. Gen Z, I mean, it's just a generation, so like, obviously there's outliers and an average group of people that act in a certain way because generation, like, it's a peer group, and peers usually are similar to each other for specific reasons. Like, we all grew up during COVID-19 as teenagers, for an example. Like, there's overlap here. But we're not weak. We tell ourselves that we're weak. And there's some objectively true, like, aspects of that. Like, can you, like, buddy, can you sit down and read a book for 4 hours? That, if you can't, then that's not exactly a symbol of willpower and strength.
Yeah,
but we're not. But we could if we wanted to, is the thing. If we wanted to prepare.
And I think a lot of people harp on different generations, Gen Z and whatnot, but like, a lot of it is like, after they've become adults, a lot of time they're just harping on the younger generations. But like,
stupid kid.
Yeah, but like, like, if we talk about the older generations, like, there are still like individuals out of school that remembered like going to school in like segregated areas. Like even
Hmm.
though we might be like weaker in some like in terms of like social acceptance and social confidence, I think that's something that as a generation we're extraordinarily strong with. Mental health wise and whatnot, like being more open and emotionally like intelligent. I think that's something that our generation is, can take a lot of pride in. And I think a
I
lot of
mean,
people
there's
that
definitely strengths and weaknesses. Yeah.
right, but and I don't think that like Gen Z is like I don't think our generation will necessarily be like weaker or stronger by any means. Like I think just like statistically speaking, like evolution takes a lot of time. I don't think 50 years is going to be the difference between like these, alpha male Chad like,
Who
baby
fought in World War
boomers,
II. Yeah.
right? Versus with us, it's just different circumstances and generationally we face different problems and we're more adept to dealing with different problems than they will.
That's a really good point, Marty. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there's so much hate, and everyone's like, "But look at look at this and look at that." And it's like, like, I like what, and a lot of statistics show that we're actually a lot like maybe like less wild than previous generations, which is kind of funny.
Less what? Wild?
Yeah, some may say like if you think like rates of like doing like like in like the 80s and 90s, like people like dropping acid all the time, like
Oh,
like that
yeah.
was more typical versus we're just like vaping. Like I think, yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
I
Yeah.
think it's a lot less like cool or badass or whatnot.
Yeah, and I'll admit my biases. I'm like, I can be harsh on this generation, like almost like the grandpa on the lawn, like you kids can't even read a dang book if you tried it. Here I am, and I can't read.
I mean,
But
yeah, I mean it's tough. I think if you want to go into reading, I think a lot of part is like just getting into that zone of reading.
mhm.
For me, I'll take like maybe 2 hours to designate reading time, and I'll get more reading done in the last half an hour than I will the first like hour
Right,
total,
yeah.
or
I
first
went to the
hour and a
library
half.
the other day, yeah, and that was it.
Yeah, it takes time to get into the zone. So I think that's the big thing is like you just a lot of time you don't have enough patience to get into that deep reading state. But once you are like you can fly through pages.
Mhm.
And we have the capability with it too.
Yeah. And I've
Yeah.
noticed that when I read in the morning or something, I feel clean. I know it's a weird word to use, but like clean, you know?
Yeah, I think mentally it helps a lot. Personally, like I did like yoga and like meditation in the morning for a bit. Now I'm sort of lifting,
Yeah.
just to get a bit swole. But still like doing like yoga to stretch and whatnot, like it lets it so that a lot of like I don't know if brain fog is like a technical term, but like a lot of the grogginess, you don't immediately go to social media and your brain doesn't necessarily just start firing immediately, but instead you're just
Mhm.
sort of you're just being present might be a better way to say it, and I think it's a good
Yeah.
way to start off your day. And some people and like I do yoga, some people might like I used to some people might run in the morning, which
Mhm.
helps, other or even going on a walk or whatnot. Just
Getting the
I,
blood pumping.
yeah, I'd say another tip that I'd say is like I wouldn't like recommend sleeping with your phone, like having your phone in your bedroom while you like in your bedroom. Like I'd probably recommend like charging it somewhere else. That way, one, like when you wake up, you don't just like lie in bed and just scroll on your phone for like 2 hours. And
Mhm.
two, like that way you have at least some sort of like distance from like social media and technology. Like at least like first thing when you wake up, it's just like, okay, like let's sort of like, take a breath and gather myself first.
Yeah.
So
I
like
mean, you
that's an
also
yeah.
yeah, sorry for cutting you off.
Oh, you're fine.
It's just like you also have to have your limitations. Like for me personally, I know that when I wake up, I don't really look at my phone. Like I get up. I use my phone as an alarm clock, so it is actually important to me to have it next to me because it's that function is very integral. Especially when I need to wake up earlier or something. Like for every Sunday I work, so I have to have that alarm for 8:20 every morning. Um, but I also know that me personally, I don't like scroll, I don't look at stuff. I get up after the alarm clock. I mean, sometimes I hit the snooze button every now and again, but
Yeah.
I don't like use the phone. But if you're somebody who has a problem and you know it, like consider what Marty said.
Yeah, I mean, for the alarm clock thing, like I definitely did that before, but I would just automatically go from there to just like using it. So I
Mhm.
actually got like I actually bought a physical um alarm clock that's like sort of like a wake up light.
From
Um,
1800s.
no, it's actually called like a wake up light where it's like as the alarm clock goes off, it lights up,
Yeah.
and then it might also play a noise if you set it like that. That way, like I have an actual alarm clock that like actually turns on like that actually gets brighter, sort of like um kind of is sort of just like sunlight hitting your face, but it's like a light sort of.
Hmm.
And then that way I actually don't have to use my phone, which which is pretty helpful. But
Yeah, and you
yeah,
need to take adjustments when need be, yeah, right?
yeah. But yeah, that was just sort of, I think with all of it, I think that we can be like optimistic. I don't know if this podcast has come about a little bit negative, but I do think that, with the free will, acknowledging that, all you can really do is buff yourself in the like for your future self, and with all this like technology, like even though I think it is a net positive having it there, like just acknowledging like, hey, there are some dangers with it, and like by
It's neutral.
recognize yes, by recognizing it, like we can counteract it, but you know, it
Yeah.
will. Oh, you can go.
No, I just said yeah.
Yeah, I was like, but I think it is. I think it'll all turn out to be like a positive influence. We just don't really know how as of yet.
Hmm. And again, like there's good things, there's bad things. So I think all in all, with free will, it's just like be grateful for what you have. Take a moment to appreciate all that you can do. Like you have a lot of choices. You can be anything you want to be technically. But I mean, I think use that idea to experiment with different things like, oh, maybe I like taking Chinese versus Spanish, or maybe I like to swim, maybe I like playing music, but like maybe I like choir more than band or something, you know? Like just there's time to experiment, but then once you latch onto something or you like something, then you can pursue that. And then from experimentation, which we all need to do at some point to find what we like, then you can like concentrate on something.
Yeah,
And free will is kind of helpful in that regard.
right. And a lot of times when you do that experimentation, if you think about it with free will, it's like, look, there's a lot that I can't control. So all I can really do is give it my best effort. And even
Hmm.
if the results aren't satisfactory, like there are advantages going into whatever next endeavor you want. And a
Yeah.
lot of times when it comes to like, let's just say like from a practical point of view, like a lot of times when there's like great innovation, it comes not from people that are within that certain industry, but from people who think radically outside of the box or take experiences that they have in completely unrelated industries and bring
Hmm.
it in. So like for example, like, we're going to be talking about like the Industrial Revolution with like steel making. Like the Bessemer process that was used to make steel to build skyscrapers existed for a while beforehand, but it was only used for making like bullet cartridges.
Yeah.
But then Andrew Carnegie and like the steel companies in Pittsburgh, like they thought, okay, well, if we can use this process not just to make bullet shells, but to make actual like support beams of steel, like that's what sort of fueled these giant skyscrapers that we see today.
Right.
But if but and that's something that he might have not gone into like learning about the Bessemer process with that particularly in mind, but that's just an advantage that he happened to get that paid off later down the line. And there's a ton of examples of different like innovations made in one field that
Hmm.
might have been mediocre at best or moot, but yet when you transition it to something else, like it helps to be a massive leap in
Yeah.
innovation.
Yeah. So I don't know, just I would say that we shouldn't be intimidated by free will. We have choices. There's definitely some stuff to be intimidated by having freedom and all that. And definitely intimidation from external factors, but I don't know. If we can find the control in our life and we understand that we have choices, if we can work on the things that hold us back, I think we'll be well off.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to wrap it up.
Yeah. Would you like to add anything onto that? Because usually I have the guests
Oh,
say
okay.
like, what's the big idea here?
Okay, well, yeah, my thing is just like, look, all you can really do with free will is sort of give your future self the best opportunity to succeed in whatever field you want to do.
Hmm.
Just sort of like acknowledge like, hey, a lot of the things of actions that you take are based off of factors that might have happened in the past and you can't control right now, or might even be things that like you can't always control. But by acknowledging that there's some stuff that you can't really control, be more appreciative and, take full advantage of what you can, I
Hmm.
guess. You
Yeah,
know?
because there's a lot there.
Yep, I think it's all about, setting up and making it easier for like you right now. Think about like, I wish I knew more about this, or I wish I was better at that, and start setting up for your future self tomorrow and, the next day after that.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. So yeah, anyway, we've gone over the usual hour time, but I felt like this was an episode that warrants that.
Okay, yeah. I saw the time and I was like, well, I guess he hasn't kicked me off yet, so I wasn't sure.
No, I thought this was some good stuff. So,
Okay.
thanks for joining me, Marty.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I think this was very, very engaging talk.
I definitely had fun. I definitely had fun, and to anyone else who gets invited, I'd highly recommend them coming on. Just a little plug for you.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, this has been Free Will, and thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you guys next time.